Welcome back. You're watching SA Today with me, Unathi, Batyashe. Well, today marks 45 years since the uprising in which many children lost their lives while standing up against a system that sought to strip them of their identity. But to many young people in the country, this day casts the spotlight on many challenges they face. Youth unemployment is at a record high and the battle for free higher education continues. Now, let's discuss this. We are joined via Zoom by Busisiwe Seabe, author, gender and social justice activist, and Fees Must Fall student leader. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Busisiwe. Well, today marks a pivotal day in our history. 45 years ago, as I said in my introduction, we saw young children taking matters basically into their own hands when they saw that they, were being oppressed. And today there seems to be little change, so say some people in some quarters, with high unemployment rates and also inequality still being at an all-time high here in South Africa. What are your thoughts, just looking at where we've come 45 years on?
Thank you very much for having me. And without ascribing insignificance to other brave dates, I think it's very important for us to make it clear that the 76 uprising was not just about the imposition of Afrikaans as a medium for educational instruction, but it was a struggle that is still political in character, economic in substance, and anti-colonial in nature. Youth today have become, even to a large extent, even our leaders today have become, and these old politicians are deflecting from the crises that we are faced with, and they are essentially just invoking the victories of the past without taking into cognizance that in the very real sense, the youth are outsiders. And this is not by choice, but by circumstance. In many instances, they're uneducated, excluded from the economy, and living in the outskirts of urban centers with few services and opportunities to change their lives. These objective factors drive high risk and antisocial behavior, which include things such as substance abuse, crime, unsafe sex, to name just a few, which in a classic vicious cycle further reinforces and exacerbates vulnerability and dislocation. The challenge we need to urgently confront is how do we disrupt this vicious cycle, right? Taking into cognizance that our unemployment rate has reached an all-time high of 74.4%, we need to take into cognizance that the youth are generally always at the forefront of social protest and change. Think about the US hippie movement, think about Black Lives Matter, think about even the Arab Spring or even the Fees Must Fall movement. Right? Having such large numbers of youth in South Africa who have little or no vested interest in the social, political, and institutional status quo represents a significant risk to social cohesion. We need to be able to understand that this provides a fertile recruitment ground for populist political movements that could threaten our democratic gains. Right? So there are two broad strategic issues that require analysis with a view of discerning policy implications and immediate actions to be taken. The first is a look at the labor market and the economy. And we have to be able to look at why are we unable to absorb the growing numbers of unemployed youth as economically active citizens? How do we break with our historic economic, path dependency? How do we reconfigure our education even and training sector and reform our labor market to ensure millions of unemployed youth find employment or access entrepreneurial activities? The second is to look at youth organization and mobilization. So pointing both to risks that need to be mitigated and opportunities that must be seized for a successful youth transition in South Africa. Key to this is the reorientating of organizations and youth mobilizations, right? And also opportunities to seize, youth momentum and the energy that young people have in order for us to have a successful transition into a more organized, organic youth intellectual. So what we need to be able to understand is that the vulnerability of South Africa's youth is nowhere more evident than in the labor market. South Africa has an extremely youthful population. Those who are below the age of 35 constitute more than 66% of the total population. A staggering 24% of the population, or rather more than 13 million people aged between 15 and 24 years old, are having issues with being economically active within our society. And with a neoliberal government like the ANC-led government we have today, who continues to sell SOEs and privatize and essentially just relegate us to the periphery, young people are frustrated. And this is why you see them taking unjust action in townships where they now attack foreign nationals, because they assume that their problem is with foreign nationals or other people taking their jobs, without understanding that the issue is with this neoliberal government and the kind of policies that they're enacting that don't agree with the kind of future or the kind of country we're trying to build as the new generation.
You've said a lot, Busisiwe, but let me perhaps, just piggyback on what you've said in terms of youth mobilization, and also just, going back to what President Cyril Ramaphosa said in his address on Youth Day today, where he said youth of South Africa need to take responsibility and charge of their future. He also said that, the youth must open their own businesses in order to curb the escalating unemployment rate amongst their peers. Now, if you hear what he's talking about and what he's launched today, the youth.mobi site that is supposedly something that will open up, some employment for the youth of South Africa. And then you see the frustrations that we've seen in Soweto just today on the youth. And then you take into cognizance the movements that are the fees must fall. Where do you think is a misalignment here, especially if you're looking at government and if you're looking at young people? So if young people had to mobilize themselves, where do they begin? Where do they start?
I must say that young people have been organizing themselves. We continuously organize ourselves, and the Fees Must Fall movement is an example of the extent to which we are willing to go to organize ourselves. But every time we organize ourselves, the institution, the state, and government itself represses our voices and they repress movements. This is why you'll have police brutality and those numbers of people being harassed by police and state, machinery being so high, because of the fact that the problem in South Africa is not the informal economy of entrepreneurs, regardless of their nationality. It is the monopolization of wealth by a white minority in land, in agriculture, and in mineral reproduction, right? This monopoly is safeguarded by a reactionary government. It is this government's failure to industrialize, create jobs, build housing, and provide education that results in the poor conditions that define Black life in South Africa. We are continuously mobilizing as young people. We are continuously coming together to be able to inform policy, to be able to contribute to what we assume is supposed to be the development of our country. But to a large extent, it is not translated, and we see government looting funds. 500 billion was looted in less than a month when it came to having to address COVID-19 and the societal ills that would then result from that. So you see a government that is unwilling to essentially put in the necessary funding, the necessary funds to be able to support young people who want to go into entrepreneurial entities, who want to support young people who want to access higher education. The dropout rate in our education system is tremendous, but this is something that the Department of Education will not speak about. What happens to, the young people who don't make it to matric? What happens to those who can't qualify to get, bachelor passes to go to universities? What happens to those young people? Like, they're relegated to the townships where they're subjected to socioeconomic conditions and social ills and things such as Nyaube. We don't have a government that takes young people seriously. And even though we call for more young people in positions of power like parliament and in legislatures, we're not seeing a translation of young people's ideas and essentially our economic pull-through translated in our society. So we have a very big problem in the sense that the president says one thing, but he acts in another way. And this is why I mentioned the neoliberal kind of system that is now being set up, because we are being run by private corporates at this present point in time. They are the ones who are determining the course of this country without taking into cognizance that we, Black people, we, the youth, are the labor, the backbone of this economy.
With the free tertiary education by 2022 being loosely thrown around by different politicians, if I can call it that, and you saying that this country is being led by a reactionary government, how then do young people in the various pockets in which they sit currently in society, how do they then change that status quo and make this a reality? Whether it's 2022 or 2030, that there is going to be free education for that Black child, particularly who needs it more?
We need to look at the youth of 76 and take example from them. The youth of 76 were willing to lay their lives down to attain the freedoms that we are enjoying today. We need to take a chapter from their book, and we need to be able to reorganize ourselves as young people with a clear strategic objective of achieving not only free, quality, decolonized education, but also access to the economy, and of not just opportunities, but essentially an industrialization within our economy and within certain sectors of society. We need to be able to look at the Fees Must Fall movement and learn from the victories of the Fees Must Fall movement, which include the insourcing of workers, and be able to move past just consolidating a minority and consolidate the whole youth of this country. Because although institutions of higher learning are microcosms of society, they only represent a privileged few who are able to access institutions of higher learning. Even though that access is to be dead, they still have the privilege of having access. What about the rest of the youth that are relegated to the townships, that are relegated to the squatter camps, that are dependent on social grants? We need to be able to galvanize, mobilize, and to bring those young people together, to say to them, we are the same person, whether you have been able to go to university or whether you've been stuck in Trafumbo or in Deep Street. We're the same kind of young person who's trying to access the same economy and create a South Africa that we can all live and thrive in. We need to start having conversations about land, our mineral resources, our agricultural prospects, and to see how as young people we can further industrialize those particular sectors in order to create jobs. Although South Africa is starting to move in the direction of the fourth industrial revolution, we will definitely fail in that endeavor, because we haven't even fundamentally been able to do the first industrial revolution of industrializing the country from its premise successfully. So if we can't industrialize South Africa with all the minerals and the resources and the agricultural prospects that we have, what makes people think that we'll be able to actively engage in the fourth industrial revolution? I believe that our leaders at this particular point in time are focused on ticking the boxes in relation to what they assume are successes, because they at this present point in time are in a position of power and comfort, without realizing that what policies, what legislations they come up with today will have an effect on the coming generations. And this is where our mobilization as young people today comes into play. And this is why, we must stand up against, these outbursts of xenophobic attacks that are happening across the country today, not only today, but continuously every single year, because young people assume that it is foreign nationals that are taking their jobs. But in actual fact, we have a government that clearly does not have a plan.
Now, we're fast running out of time, Busisiwe, but perhaps let me squeeze in this last question that I'm going to ask you to answer in a very short space of time. It's very overwhelming for young people watching this interview and also seeing some of the things that they are facing today, high unemployment, inequality, etc. What gives you hope about this country? What keeps you going and gives you the energy that we are seeing from you?
For me, it has to be the late Mam Nomzamo, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. In the sense that she had taught us, and I would like the youth to remember the kind of woman that was the mother of this nation. She had taught us that we should stand for what we believe in, regardless of whether we are joined by masses of people or not. What keeps me motivated is the vision that I have for this country, and I hope that young people will invest not only in themselves, but will invest in us as young people, as a collective, in striving to challenge a lot of the issues that are facing us as young people. There's nothing that can be done without young people, and there is no change that will be effected if young people do not rise up and take the bull by the horns. If a revolution needs to happen, it needs to happen, and it must be led by young people.
Busisiwe, thank you so much again for your time this afternoon. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. That was Busisiwe Seabe. You might know her from the Fees Must Fall student leader, but she's also an author for gender and social justice activist. Well, we'll have more